Happy New Year from all of us at Gronsky Books. There are really just a couple of us here. There's Hong Kong Fooey there, and this is my old friend Smokey. Last year, I introduced the 2003 Smokey Awards. He's the guardian of the bookshelf. The first award that we're going to hand out is for the best book actually published in 2024. Now, I only read 8 books that were published in 2024. I don't have a lot to choose from, but the one that rose to the top was After Oz by Gordon McAlpine. Now, After Oz is sort of an alternate universe version of The Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy comes back after her trip from Oz, after the tornado ravages a small town in Kansas, and she comes back with this tale of witches and scarecrows and, live tin men, and specifically, most importantly, a tale of how she killed a witch. Now, after the tornado, the townsfolk, during their efforts of rebuilding and kind of checking on their neighbors, discovered that an old woman had been murdered in her house. And so Dorothy's tale of having killed a witch matches up with the description of how this old spinster was discovered murdered. And so the townsfolk are quick to point fingers at Dorothy. They think that her tale of Oz sounds diabolical, like witchcraft itself. And so she's put on trial, but because she is a minor, she's sentenced to an insane asylum, at which point a young female alienist named Dr. Wilford comes to check on the welfare of Dorothy, talk to her, get to know her, find out what her story is. And Dr. Wilford believes that Dorothy is innocent and that maybe there's an actual murderer out there on the lam. So she takes it upon herself to solve this old woman's murder. And that's the bulk of the book. Dorothy is really only in a couple of chapters in this. The rest of the book explores Dr. Wilford's interactions with the townsfolk, the clergy, the law in town, and she's investigating this murder. So ultimately, After Oz is kind of this murder mystery, but it really is not so much about the mystery itself. It's more about an exploration of social attitudes in the early 20th century, and really kind of a compare and contrast toward social attitudes today. How much different are we now than we were 100 years ago? And I just thought that it was very incisively written, and far and above anything else, it's a great character study across all these townsfolk. I thought it was a fantastic read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Gordon McAlpine died before this book was published. This will probably be the last book that he's got out. It's the only book by him I've ever read. Apparently, he's written a number of other books, kind of that it plays fast and loose with the mystery genre, and so I'm looking forward to reading more by him. But Gordon McAlpine wins this year's Smokey Award for the best book actually published in 2024. All right, next up, we're going to go with the Smokey Award for the best nonfiction book that I read in 2014. And this one was published in 1917 by Hamlin Garland. This is a book that I discussed earlier in the year. It is called A Son of the Middle Border. And this book, largely, the first half of the book, mostly takes place in a small town in Iowa, the same small town where I grew up. And this is actually the only reason why I know who Hamlin Garland is, despite the fact that he wrote 49 works of prose and poetry, nonfiction and fiction between 1891 and 1939. Almost 50 books in his lifetime, and he was very well received and very well regarded in his day, but he's largely been forgotten now. And again, I only know about him because I grew up in the same town that he grew up in. So A Son of the Middle Border is his most famous book, I would say. And here he writes largely about growing up in Wisconsin, the overland move to Iowa, and then he, as an adult, after seminary, he moves east to make a living for himself, and then back west again. So it's a travelogue. It's a great book for anybody who's interested in the westward expansion era of American history. It's a great autobiography. It really captures a lot of the day-to-day life. It's not so much historical, as in like the broad sweeping changes in America at the time, but it's a really good microcosm, like the daily things, like, the fields freeze over in the winter and they bring out their ice skates and they skate on the, where their crops would be growing in the spring. Hamlin Garland writes about when he starts working for his father, he demands a wage, and his father recognizes that he's become a man, and so the wage that Hamlin Garland has demanded of his father is enough money for him to buy himself a hat. These are small details that might be lost to time, like exploring these little social matters that often get lost in bigger historical books. It's kind of a really neat look at day-to-day life at the turn of the century. Okay, I'm moving on to the Smoky Award for the biggest surprise of 2024. And this is a book by G.S. Denning. It is the first in a series. It's an urban fantasy series featuring Warlock Holmes. So this is an alternate telling of Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. This is Warlock Holmes, and the book is A Study in Brimstone, which is a retelling of Doyle's A Study in Scarlet, the first full-length Holmes novel. Now, the reason this is the biggest surprise is I went into this with very, very low expectations. I thought this is probably just another one of those kind of cash-in books. It's in the public domain, so why not try to cash in on something famous? We'll do something quirky. We'll have a cheap gimmick here. We'll make Sherlock a wizard, and that's how he solves crimes. But it was actually very well written. It was very well thought out. It was atmospheric. It was hilarious. It really hit on all cylinders, and I'm looking forward to reading more of G.S. Denning's works in this series. And it's just a lot of good fun. So it was definitely my biggest surprise of the year. Okay, moving on to the best sci-fi fantasy, the Smoky Award for the best science fiction or fantasy book. I read, I think, about 15 books in the sci-fi or fantasy genre this year. And there are a number of books that were very good that could have qualified for this one. But the one that I'm going to pick here is Flatland by Edwin Abbott. Now, I actually read this at the very beginning of 2024, and I've got a lot of notes written on this. I've got a video ready to go on it. I did a lot of ancillary research. He uses the science fiction setting to criticize social attitudes of the time. In this one, he's specifically criticizing the Victorian era attitudes, the ruling class, especially as it relates to class warfare, gender equality, that kind of thing. So Edwin Abbott was a biblical scholar, and he administered a school. He was one of the first administrators in England to allow female students in his school. He was a big proponent of John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor Mill's work on gender equality. So what is Flatland about? The main character is a square. He is a lawyer, I think, in this book. Every generation begets a being of greater dimensions. So his son would be a pentagon, his grandson would be a hexagon, and so forth. As these generations propagate, they're less and less likely to sire offspring. So most of the population are like triangles. And all the women are lines. It's really hard to condense into a really short review, and it sounds extraordinarily silly, but it's written as if this is a serious anthropological study of the world of two dimensions, and that's the first half of the book. The second half of the book, Abbott attempts to help the reader visualize what a fourth dimension might look like through this tale of this two-dimensional square encountering a sphere from Spaceland. So the sphere from Spaceland enters into the two-dimensional space of Flatland, makes his presence known to the square, and lifts him up into the third dimension. The square cannot possibly comprehend what he's seeing at first, and slowly he dawns to this understanding. It's a fantastic book. It's very short. I think it's like 117 pages. I read it 3 times last year, and I've got so many notes written on this book, not only from the tale of his encounter with the sphere, but also the social commentary in the first half of the book. It sent me off to read, John Locke, Descartes. I read Hereditary Genius, which is a book that we'll hear about later on in this video. I read so many other things in preparation for that video. I just never got around to filming it. Too much stuff in my personal life came up, and I just wasn't able to get a lot of videos made last year. But it is something that I'm still working on, and I would like to get that out. So, best science fiction fantasy that I read this year was Flatland by Edwin Abbott. Okay. Next up, we're going to do the best short fiction. So this is a collection of short stories by Ray Bradbury called October Country. I think this was published as a collection originally in like 1955 or 53. The stories have been published throughout the late 40s, early 50s, and then collected finally in 55 or so. So depending on the collection that you have, there should be about 19 stories. Collections vary through different editions. And so each one of these stories is focused largely on at least one of the three following themes, and I wrote them down here, are the breakdown of traditional relationships between men and women, the frangibility of the human body, and or the many ways we connect with our mortality. Now, my favorite two stories in this collection are Next in Line, which is a story about the Mexican catacombs. His husband and wife are vacationing in Mexico from the United States. The husband is a photographer. He hires somebody to take him into the catacombs, and this profoundly disturbs his wife and sets us up for a very disturbing ending. It's a lot of kind of gruesome body horror in this. Very unique story for Ray Bradbury. And the second of my two favorite stories in October Country is The Scythe. Very simply, in which death passes the torch to the next death. So it's a great story. There are many great stories in this collection. Again, this is one of those books that as soon as I finished it, I turned right around and read it again from the beginning. I read it twice back to back last year. It was just phenomenal. I highly recommend this one. I liked the October Country even more than I liked The Illustrated Man, which I read last year, which is another fantastic collection of Bradbury stories. So I'm just a huge fan of his short works. So, okay, the next category, we've got Best Poetry. The best book of poetry that I read this year was another Hamlin Garland book. This is from 1893. It's a collection of poems called Prairie Songs. This is picturesque poetry, kind of at its best. Garland traveled the country quite extensively, and he's just almost ecstatically communal with the land in this book. It's remarkable, his descriptions. It's right there on the surface. It doesn't require any interpretation. It's just beautiful. It evokes a lot of feelings of my own love for nature and my own love for travel. And I just really enjoyed this. Now, this book is really hard to find, and I actually found a copy of this in the research department at my local library. So I had to take the book out and just read it there in the department. I couldn't take it out of the room. So I just spent an afternoon, read the whole book straight through, and took some notes on that. And I wanted to read a few lines from the last poem. It's the longest poem in the collection. And it kind of goes a little something like this. Here at the end of my book I rest, and memories throng upon me. Memories wide as seas, cool as streams, and lofty as the serrate rim of mountain chains. Memories of fields and pleasant groves, rushing winds, and nights of moonlit splendor, September, imperishable memories of mighty days circling before me. Yeah, it's just right there on the surface. I love it. It was beautiful. It touched me, and I certainly want to read some more of Hamlin Garland's work after my introduction to him in 2024. Okay, we're gonna move on to the best posthumous publication. Now, this is one. I read a couple books that were posthumously published in 2024. The one that I picked for best posthumous publication is Until August by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and that was published in 2024, 10 years after the author's death. And sad to say, this is my first Gabriel Garcia Marquez book ever. I've never read 100 Years of Solitude, anything else by him that I probably should have read by now. It's horrible. And after reading this book, his last book, it's a very short novel and it's so beautifully written. I can't wait to actually read something else by him. So Anna is in a long-term marriage, and many years ago her mother died and she's buried on this island far away from home. So every August, she takes this annual trip out to this island to pay her respects at her mother's grave. And while she's away on this little kind of vacation from the rest of her life and from her husband, she stays at a hotel. And while she's there, she attempts to strike up a sexual affair with a man at the bar inside the hotel that she stays at. She does this every year. Now, on the surface, this does not sound like, to me, like something that I would normally read. But this is a story that is so much less about the actual plot than it is about our human tendencies to want things that run counter to our well-being, even to the rest of our character. Anna doesn't know why she wants to do this, yet she's compelled to do it, and she wants to do it, and she's going to keep on seeking these affairs, even though it's caused her problems, it's caused her regrets. And so there's this tug both directions, where this is something that she wants and it's something that she knows isn't really good for her. And so it's that tug of war that is so expertly written. I've never been in a situation like Anna puts herself in this book, but I felt like I could understand her motivations, at least her thought process and how she felt, the ambivalence that she felt about her life and her situation. It was a really just beautifully written book, great character in Anna there, and again, can't wait to read more by Garcia Marquez. Okay, that leads us to the Smoky Award for the most original book that I read in 2024. And this is another oldie. This is published in 1896. This is The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. This is actually the very last book that I read in 2024. I read it on my computer at work during the holidays, and when things were a little bit slow. It's a short book, and I read it over the course of a week on my breaks at work. So this is a story about Edward Prendick. Prendick, yeah. And he's stranded on this tropical island out in the Pacific somewhere, and he encounters this mad scientist, Dr. Moreau, who has been ostracized from his home in London for kind of these unscrupulous experimentations on human beings. He went to this deserted island where he restarted his experimentation. So what Moreau does is he carves away at animals bit by bit. He makes these little alterations bit by bit in their skin, with their bones. He crafts them into these creatures that approximate a human shape. It's absolutely monstrous. And what year was this again? 1896. In 1896, this was a true horror novel. And honestly, in 2024, it still felt pretty haunting and disturbing to me. I first read this in high school, and I didn't like it so much. And I think it's because the writing style has really shown its age here. But I'm not going to fault H.G. Wells for that. I mean, this is 130 years ago almost. So we have definitely moved on with our expectations of what science fiction writing is supposed to be. Prendick is just horrified by what he sees. He's horrified, but he also feels empathy. And there's times when Prendick is running for his life from these creatures, and there's times when he's trying to save them and do right by them. And so he's got this tug and pull as well. You know, are these creatures to be feared, to be pitied, to, are they should he fight for them? So this book poses a lot of questions, and it's definitely earned its place in the long history of science fiction. And I think we're going to remember this book for a long time yet to come. Okay, so then we're going to come to the best debut novel that I read in 2024 that I know of. There might have been some other books on this that I read in 2024 that were debuts that I wasn't aware of. But the one that I chose was actually the first book that I read in 2024, and that is All Day is a Long Time by David Sanchez. This tells the decades-long story of a character named David. I don't know how autobiographical this is, but David is addicted to crack and meth. He's down there on the Gulf Coast of Florida. It takes a decade, I think, from the beginning to the end of the story. It just follows his struggles on the street, his like the clever ways, like the streetwise ways that he gets by, ways he makes money, situations that he's thrust into that overwhelm him, that bring him despair, bring him great joy, great pleasure. It's a book about indulgences and then the fallout from those indulgences, like the long fallout of those indulgences. But it's not just a book about addiction. It's not just a tragic story. That all that is just sort of the ride we hitch to get to the end of the book, where we really revel in the redemptive power of literature. And for such a short book, and it is a short book, David Sanchez really is able to craft these heart-wrenching and redemptive themes together into a very cohesive, very easy to follow story. I can't wait for his next book. I've been looking for news. I think this came out in 2022. I've been looking to see if he's got anything else out. He's an author I'm going to be watching very closely, and I can't wait for his next book. Okay, so just real quick, Smokey there on the shelf has been with me since like 2000, the year 2000, so 25 years now. And he used to live in the back window of my old car. I had this old Saturn SL1 that I bought in Alaska, and Smokey lived in the back window there. And I was a smoker back then. All my friends were smokers back then, so we all smoked cigarettes. And his full name is Secondhand Smokey because the poor dinosaur was constantly having to inhale our polluted air. He is Secondhand Smokey, the Stegosaurus, shortened to just Smokey. So he's been with me for a long time. I quit smoking in 2009, and he's very grateful for that. I don't have that car anymore. I don't keep him in my car, but he is now the guardian of my bookshelves, and I've named my annual awards after him, the Smokey Awards. That's for good books. The bad books have got to be the Anti-Smokey Awards. So he's I'm probably the only one amused by this, but anyway, the first Anti-Smokey Award of 2024 is in the category of Most Needlessly Violent Book, and that's got to go to Vigilante Run by Phil Elmore. Now, Vigilante Run is part of the Executioner series. It's a long-running series. It started in 1982 and finally wrapped up around 2017. Vigilante Run is the 346th book in a 453 book series. That's incredible. I think almost all of them, if not all of them, feature Mac Bolan, who's a former Vietnam Army sniper with 90 confirmed kills in Vietnam. And that's just where the series starts. He's already got 90 kills by the first book. In Vigilante Run, which is the only book in the Executioner series that I've ever read or probably ever will read, he kills dozens of people, maybe 3 dozen or 4 dozen people all told. Like it's just a huge body count of people that Mac Bolan kills, and he's contracted out through the government, whether it's a CIA or some other shadowy organization. He moves in and out with all these different organizations throughout the series. And so after 453 books of killing dozens of people a book, I calculate that Mac Bolan has probably killed about 10,000 people over his literary career. I can't find anybody online actually tracking Mac Bolan's body count, but I did ask ChatGPT how many people Mac Bolan has killed, and Chat lost track at about 1,500, gave up after the first 50 books. So I'm pretty confident that my calculation of 10,000 is at least in the ballpark. This guy is a walking war crime. Was it fun to read? I don't know. It was kind of hilariously bad, but he's definitely getting the Anti-Smokey Award for the most needlessly violent book of the year. All right. So the next Anti-Smokey Award is going to go to my biggest disappointment of the year. And this book was also published in 2024. I was really looking forward to it. I got excited when I saw that there was a new Michael Crichton book. I was kind of hedging my bets because a lot of the posthumous Michael Crichton books have been just garbage, or mostly garbage. This one, I heard, was a longtime passion project of Michael Crichton before he died. This is about volcanology. A volcano erupts on the island of Hawaii, and he spent a lot of years researching this and collecting notes, and writing big portions of the story. Now, what's her name? Sherry Crichton, his, I think, most recent wife, is the guardian of Michael Crichton's estate, and she reached out to James Patterson to finish Michael Crichton's work. And of all the thriller authors that she could have chosen, I don't know why she didn't pick a more technologically inclined author. James Patterson, I think, was a terrible choice. I think his writing is almost insultingly simple. He doesn't spend any time, with descriptions or character development. It's just sequentially ordered sentences to take us through the plot without adding any kind of depth. Now, I think the only thing that survived from Michael Crichton's work was the premise of the book and his actual research. And that research stands out like a sore thumb against James Patterson's really blasé writing. This was just... For James Patterson to have agreed to take on this project from a far superior writer, in my opinion, it feels like stolen valor to me, to put your name on a book with Michael Crichton and then to do this with what he gave you. It was horribly disappointing. I think I've made that pretty clear. Okay, so we're going to move on to the worst books of the year. The Anti-Smokey Awards for the worst books of the year. And when we wrap this up, we're going to go into the best books of the year. Okay, so I've got two here, one for fiction and one for nonfiction. And so the Anti-Smokey Award for the worst fiction of the year is Triceratops and Bottoms. And this is exactly what it looks like. This is human dinosaur erotica. Very graphic human dinosaur erotica. This woman, what's her name? Erin, is this sexy socialite of the future who has everything, has had everything, including wild party sex with aliens. So what do you give a sex-crazed socialite of the future who has everything? You give her the gift of time travel. So she takes this time travel belt and she goes back into prehistoric times where she takes her next sexual exploits. And she has sex with lots of dinosaurs. Just lots and lots of dinosaurs. It's just this whole series of stories about Erin having sex with different kinds of dinosaurs. But I'll leave the further descriptions of that up to your imagination. But Triceratops and Bottoms was a real mess. In more ways than one. Okay, so the Anti-Smokey Award for the worst nonfiction goes to Francis Galton's Hereditary Genius, and this was published in 1868. Now, Francis Galton was Charles Darwin's cousin, his first cousin, And he greatly admired Darwin's work on the origin of the species, and he kind of took that a step further. Galton is now known as the grandfather of eugenics, a social science that was adopted by the Nazi Party in the 30s, and it used his work as a springboard to, launch all of their atrocities. In this book, Hereditary Genius, this is a seminal work that kind of started all that. Inherited genius, meaning that genius or greatness is a trait that is inherited, and it belongs solely in the lines of the white ruling class of England. Galton takes a look at historical figures, like naval heroes and judges and political figures throughout England's history, and then he looks at the wider world of especially black people in history, and he doesn't find as much greatness there as he finds in the white race. And so he invents this statistical analysis tool called regression toward the mean, which has since been proven to be a really faulty tool because it can be used to twist data to support a presupposition. And also in this book, it's the first time the concept of nature versus nurture is explored, which is probably the only reason that this book is really still talked about today, because it kind of started that debate. I read this whole book. I did not enjoy this at all. I knew I wasn't going to enjoy this, but I read this as research into my Flatland video, which again I never did put out, but should be coming later on in the year. And if I do produce that video, I will talk more about Hereditary Genius. I've got a lot of specific examples from that book that I think are kind of obliquely addressed in Edwin Abbott's book Flatland, kind of a takedown of some of these notions. So yeah, that was the worst nonfiction that I read all year. Okay, so we're coming toward the end here. We're going to hand out the Smoky Award for the best reread of 2024, and then we're going to do the top 5 new reads of 2024. So the best book that I reread in 2024 was The Trial by Franz Kafka, 1925. The Trial has been one of my favorite books since I first read it 25 or so years ago. And there's a few scenes that just stick with me over and over and over. The scene with the artist, where he convinces him to buy all of his paintings, and then the penultimate chapter when Joseph K. goes to see the prison or the court chaplain. They call it the monologue of the priest, I think is what that section is known as. It's like a puzzle. It's an allegorical puzzle that Joseph K. refuses to try to understand. The whole premise of the trial is that Joseph K. has been arrested. They won't tell him on whose authority or what his crime is, so he doesn't take any of it seriously. But he goes to his hearings mostly just to admonish the court for how silly it is, and he never takes any of this seriously. And then the book kind of ends in the only way that it could end. This book has been talked about a lot. It's the thing about the plot of the trial is clear. The motivations behind the machinations of the plot elements are not clear. But then again, the themes of this book are abundantly clear. Like the best allegories, you can speak more about the story than is actually written in the story. And I think probably more has been said about the trial than is actually contained within the book itself. It's a difficult one to talk about, especially in a short review. So I'll just say that The Trial is my best reread of 2024, and I'll leave it at that now. Okay, so that leads us into the top 5 new reads of 2024. These aren't really in any particular order. I did save the last one for what was probably my favorite new read of the year. All right, so we've got Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. This is published in 1960. This is a Western. It follows 4 men who start off in Kansas, and they go on. They team up, and they hire on to go on to this buffalo hunt out in Colorado. They take kind of a digressive course. They're short on water. Before they even get to the hunt, you get the sense that their mission is doomed. Right? They're imperiled. But then they find water, they find the buffalo, and they get so caught up in the hunt of this buffalo that they lose track of time, they lose track of their season, and they end up getting snowed in. It's a really hard-hitting story, and it's not super typical of the Westerns that I've read in my life. It's not like a shoot 'em up at the corral, and it gives a really good sense of just how impersonal and capricious nature is. The other thing that I really liked about this book is that the 4 men on this hunt are built from these like archetypical characters, and they really overlap very little with each other. So they're 4 very distinct men on this trip. The thing that ties them together is that they've all agreed to participate in this hunt. And so that really sets up a lot of interesting conflict between the men, really compelling dynamic between them, as like from the beginning to when they're imperiled, to where they're finding success, to where they're in peril again, and then finally how the book winds up. You go through all these phases, and all these men and the differences in their character really come to light. It's just from top to bottom, it's a great book. It's one of my favorite Westerns that I've ever read. Okay, so the next book then on this list is a nonfiction book. This is The Professor and the Madman by Simon Winchester. So this is all about the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary. This is like the decades-long quest to standardize the English language formally for the very first time. And there were many contributors to this. There's the people at Oxford, but then they also enlisted the help of lay people in the community who had an interest in words. And one of the biggest contributors was Dr. Minor. This is a American Civil War field surgeon who's now living in England. He is in an insane asylum because he was convicted of murder, and he is properly crazy. This book is kind of equal parts biography of Dr. Minor, but it is also very detail oriented into the production and the methods used to track down the original uses of a lot of words in the English language, providing examples of how that was done. And it's a short book. I think it's under 300 pages. It's just so good, beginning to end, on all of those accounts. I was surprised at how interesting the creation, like a nonfiction book about the creation of a dictionary could be. That might not sound like your cup of tea, but I promise you it is. It's really good. All right. So next on this list is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I can't believe it took me this long to read this book. I let McCarthy's books go unread for a really long time, and I just started reading them for the first time a couple of years ago. I finally read The Road. I saw the movie with Viggo Mortensen when it first came out. I enjoyed it. This book exceeded my expectations. And of all the McCarthy books that I've read, this is the most straightforward, the most like accessible, like prose-wise. There's no density to penetrate here. It's brutal for sure. But I think McCarthy's point is that in the face of brutality, it's sort of like this book is like the high watermark in post-apocalyptic literature, I think. It is the standard by which all others are going to be judged probably forever. But even amidst the end of all things, McCarthy leaves room for sincerity and tenderness. These basic human traits will not always be forever lost. You will always find a bastion of goodness somewhere, even if it's doomed to a fate worse than death. And if that doesn't sound like compelling reading, McCarthy's just not for you. Okay. Next on this list of the best reads that I read for the first time in 2024 is We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. And this was first published, this is a Russian novel, first published in 1924. So 100 years ago. And I had planned on I was reading it in 2024 because I wanted to do a 100-year anniversary of We. We is a utopia novel that predates the likes of Anthem by Ayn Rand, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, 1984 by George Orwell. All three of those books, which are more well-known than We, owe an enormous debt to Yevgeny Zamyatin. And I really wanted to do a video kind of highlighting that. It's one of those things that I just didn't get around to this year. But I enjoyed We immensely, and I can't recommend that highly enough if you like books like 1984, Brave New World, or Anthem. You're going to love We, especially in the context of that this came first and there was nothing like this beforehand. And then one thing that I learned after I read the book was that We wasn't actually published in its original language, in Russian, until 1988. The Soviet government had suppressed Zamyatin's work for 64 years because, it's an authoritarian government. And what imperial hegemony would ever want their people to take control of their own lives? And that's what We is about. The awakening that happens inside you when you've been repressed for so long that you don't have to live like that anymore. And that's a dangerous, dangerous idea. Okay, so the number one book, this is the best read, the thing that you've all been waiting for. The best first-time read of 2024, the Smoky Award goes to Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson. And this is one of the shortest books that I read all year. And this is another one of those books that as soon as I got to the end of it, I started over immediately and read it again right from the beginning. And Train Dreams definitely rewards a reread. So basically what this is about, what's the guy's name? Robert Granier. This is loosely styled as a Western. It takes place in the early 20th century, where Robert Granier is sort of eking out the life of like the workaday. He works the land, works menial jobs. He has a family for a time. I don't want to give anything away, but it really strikes a fantastic balance between being hyper real and kind of otherworldly. The otherworldliness, sort of the mystical parts of this book, are very understated, and you might not even realize that it's happening the first time through. And for me, if you call this a novella, it's right up there with the very best novellas ever written. I'd put it right up there with Of Mice and Men as classic, enduring literature for all times. Well, okay, so that is the 2024 Smoky Awards. They've been handed out. Congratulations to all the recipients. I will see you again in the next video. Hopefully in 2025, I'll be putting out some more videos on a regular basis. I'm not going to make any promises. Let me leave you here now with all of the books that I read in 2024. If you see anything on these screens here that you would like me to discuss more in depth, maybe do another video on, go deeper dive into any of these, you let me know. I've got a lot of notes on a lot of these books, and I guess that's it. Until next time, read something good.